The rooster hadn't even started crowing when Calvin Brooks jolted awake. It wasn't a sound that stirred him, it was the silence. A dead, unnatural quiet. The kind of stillness that pressed in around your ribs and made you listen harder just to hear your own heartbeat. Something was wrong. He didn't know how, but he could feel it in his gut. He swung his legs off the edge of the bed, bones creaking with the motion. The old farmhouse groaned right along with him, joints aching from 100 years of Missouri winters. Calvin was 47, though his body sometimes felt twice that. He stood, scratched at the scruff on his jaw, and made his way to the kitchen, where a pot of coffee from yesterday sat cold and forgotten on the stove. Out the window, the sky was just beginning to lighten. A thin band of orange smeared across the horizon behind the rolling hills of Liberty Ridge. He poured the coffee anyway, black as his mood, and took it with him to the porch. And then he saw it. His breath caught mid-sip. The eastern fence line, barely visible in the morning haze, had a new sag. He knew that fence, like he knew the lines on his own palm. It had stood straight as a soldier just yesterday. Now, the wire drooped like a snapped shoelace. God damn it, he whispered, already knowing what he'd find. He slipped on his boots, mud-caked and still damp from yesterday's fieldwork, and grabbed the flashlight hanging by the door. Shotgun stayed in the corner. No point bringing a fight to shadows. The porch steps creaked as he descended, the cold grass soaking through his socks as he walked briskly toward the field. Halfway there, he didn't need the flashlight anymore. The rising sun cast enough light to see the fresh footprints in the dirt. Multiple sets. Heavy, deliberate. Someone or several someones had been here. Again, for the 4th time in 2 months. Same MO every damn time. They didn't touch the feed corn or the green tomatoes. They went straight for the good stuff, his premium purple sweet corn and the prized honeydew melons he'd spent 3 years perfecting. High-end crops for farmers markets and organic grocers across southern Missouri. These weren't kids out joyriding and looking for kicks. This was surgical, intentional, professional. Calvin squatted down and studied the fence. Cut clean with bolt cutters, no jagged edges, no tearing. These weren't amateurs. The tracks led straight into row 9, where his most mature stalks grew tall and straight under the summer sun. Even from a distance, he could see the damage rows trampled, husks ripped. A harvest, not a raid. He followed the tracks a little further. The soil had been churned by vehicle tires, small, narrow, likely a compact pickup, backed right up to the crop and loaded fast. He recognized the pattern now, same as last time, same as the time before that. He stood up slowly, joints protesting, and looked out over the rest of the property. The barn was still closed, the tractor parked, chickens still in the coop, blissfully unaware that thousands of dollars worth of produce had disappeared in the night. No cameras had picked up a thing. He'd installed 2 trail cams after the second theft, both aimed at the drive. One had gone out a week ago. The other seemed to have missed everything. Again. He took a long pull of his bitter coffee and stared down the rows of corn. 4th time's a damn pattern, he muttered. Calvin trudged back to the farmhouse, each step heavier than the last. The gravel crunched beneath his boots in the driveway as the early light painted the fields in gold. Normally, he might have paused to appreciate it. Today, it just made the silence louder. Inside, he sat at the kitchen table and opened his worn leather ledger. Numbers didn't lie. His profit margin for the summer had been thin to begin with. Now, with nearly 20% of his organic harvest stolen, he'd be lucky to break even. And that was without counting the banknote. He flipped to the back of the book, where the loan terms were written in neat block print. He owed $42,000 by October. His next payment was due in 6 weeks. He'd counted on a full harvest, on getting top dollar at market to cover costs and reinvest in equipment. Now, that window was closing fast. He leaned back in his chair, fingers laced behind his head. The ceiling fan clicked softly overhead, doing little to stir the hot morning air. The Brooks family had farmed this land for 4 generations. His great-grandfather had bought the first 60 acres in 1897, cleared it by hand, and planted corn with a mule-drawn plow. Calvin had grown up hearing those stories while riding in the combine with his father. Back then, Liberty Ridge was a patchwork of family farms, stitched together by dirt roads and Sunday potlucks. Now, most of the neighbors had sold out. Petersons were gone. Millers, too. The land gobbled up by Agricorp and other mega farmers who planted monocrops with drones and imported labor. They called it efficiency. Calvin called it a death sentence for small farmers. He had held out, switched to organics, diversified his crops, took a few online courses in soil management and sustainable irrigation. He did everything by the book, and still someone was taking it from him. He stood and poured the rest of the coffee down the sink. The bitter taste lingered. As he stepped back onto the porch, the sun had fully risen. The fields glistened with morning dew, a cruel contrast to the pit in his stomach. He needed help. But not from the sheriff. He already knew how that conversation would go. And not from the bank. They only cared about interest rates, not the blood in the soil. Calvin clenched his jaw. If he didn't find a way to stop the thefts, this year's harvest would be his last. Somewhere out there, someone was getting rich off his crops. Someone who thought farmers like him were easy targets. They were about to find out they'd picked the wrong man. The local sheriff's office in Liberty Ridge looked more like a roadside bait shop than a seat of justice. Faded siding, a crooked flagpole, and a plastic closed sign that somehow never fully rotated back after hours. Calvin Brooks pulled into the gravel lot with a squeal of dry brakes, parked his old F-150 under the only surviving elm in sight, and stepped out into the rising heat of mid-morning. He had that kind of weight in his stride that came not from age, but from knowing you were about to waste time you didn't have. Inside, the linoleum floors creaked like old bones. Deputy Collins sat behind the front desk, boots propped up, sipping burnt coffee from a chipped world's best dad mug that had clearly seen better Father's Days. He looked up with a shrug more than a greeting. "Brooks," Collins mumbled. "Fourth time, huh?" "Yeah," Calvin replied, voice dry as fence dust. "Fence cut, sweet corn and melons gone, same pattern, and still not a damn footprint on camera." Collins didn't even blink. "You file a report last time?" "You know I did." "And the time before that?" "Yup." The deputy sighed, standing up like it took more effort than it should. He reached for a yellow notepad and began scribbling like it was purely for show. "Look, Calvin, we don't got patrol units to post up outside your fields all night. I mean, hell, y'all grow vegetables, not diamonds." "You seen the prices at the farmer's market lately?" Calvin snapped, trying to stay civil. "My purple corn goes for $5 an ear. These thieves aren't stealing for kicks. They know what they're doing." Collins raised a brow, maybe the most energy he'd put into the whole conversation. "You sure this ain't just some teenagers, prank season and all?" Calvin shot him a look that could have curdled milk. "You ever known a teenager to selectively harvest corn at peak sugar content and skip the rest? These folks know more about organic crop rotation than you do." Collins clicked his pen closed and slid the notepad away. "I'll log it," he said, like a man stamping a form that'd never be read again. "You might want to consider game cams, motion lights, maybe even get a big old dog." Calvin didn't bother to respond. He turned on his heel and walked out the door before he said something he'd regret. Out in the lot, he kicked the front tire of his truck with a sigh. Liberty Ridge wasn't the town it used to be. The big ag companies had swallowed every third family farm within a 10-mile radius. They came with their leases, their advisors, and their goddamn drones. Now it was just Calvin's 22 acres hanging on by willpower and a fourth-generation stubborn streak. As he turned the key in the ignition, a slow clink of the engine echoed his mood worn down, close to empty. Later that afternoon, Calvin sat on his front porch, sipping lukewarm sweet tea and watching a brown dust devil tumble across the back pasture. It wasn't even a breeze, just heat rising off the earth like the land was exhaling all its disappointment. That's when he heard the slow roll of tires on gravel. It was Russell. 65, retired postal worker turned part-time philosopher in a rust-red Chevy that looked held together with duct tape and fishing wire. He pulled up and leaned out the window. "Heard you got hit again," Russell said without preamble. Calvin nodded, his jaw locked tight. "Fourth time. No help from the law either." Russell chewed that over. "You know what I'd do if I was you? Leave the gate open and bait it with fireworks?" Russell grinned. "Close. I'd wire up some of them new age gizmos, motion sensors, night vision. Maybe that thermal camera junk my nephew keeps jabbering about. Calvin raised a skeptical brow. That's a lot of tech for a man who still pays bills by check. Russell chuckled, tapping his temple. I don't need to know how to use it. I just need to know someone who does. That night, with a couple phone calls and a whole lot of pacing, Calvin reached out to Tanner. His 19-year-old nephew was 2 semesters into a computer engineering program at Kansas City Tech. Last Calvin heard, the kid had just built a drone that could follow voice commands useless on a farm, but maybe not entirely. Tanner picked up on the second ring. Uncle Cal, everything all right? Wish I could say yes. You remember the thefts I mentioned last time? Yeah. It happened again. There was silence for a beat. What's the damage? Corn and melons, high-end stuff. Someone's targeting just the organic rows. Want me to come down? Calvin looked out at the moonlit field, half barren now. Yeah, I think I need your brain. 2 days later, Tanner showed up in a used Honda with a laptop bag, 2 toolboxes, and a caffeine habit that would worry most doctors. He stepped out, tall and lanky, in a hoodie that read, Eat, Sleep, Code, Repeat. I brought some toys, he said, popping the trunk. Olivia pulled up just 10 minutes after, in a clean Subaru with city plates and a look on her face that said she'd driven straight from another life. She stepped out in boots too clean for the soil, but wore a determined look that fit the place like a glove. I took the weekend off, she said. The least I can do is help you protect what's ours. Calvin felt something tighten in his chest, not panic, not pride. Something older than both, family. That night, after dinner, the 3 of them sat around the kitchen table. Olivia brought out a legal pad and started sketching ideas. Tanner pulled up diagrams on his laptop. Calvin just listened, nodding occasionally, sipping black coffee even though it was past midnight. You think people will care? Calvin asked, half to himself. If we catch them? Olivia met his eyes. People care about stories, Cal, especially ones where a small-town farmer outsmarts crooks using tech. We catch them, hell yeah, they'll care. You could post it, Tanner added. Make a video. TikTok eats that David versus Goliath stuff alive. Calvin blinked. What's a TikTok? Tanner and Olivia laughed, and for the first time in weeks, the air felt a little lighter. All right then, Calvin said. Let's give them something to talk about. He didn't know it yet, but that moment sitting around a table with family and a plan was the first real turning point. Not in the crops, not even in the thefts, but in the story. A story that was just beginning to take root. Calvin Brooks stared at the whiteboard in his kitchen like it might sprout legs and solve his problem for him. He had written, How to Catch a Thief, in bold red marker at the top, underlined it twice, and now stood with his arms folded, chewing on a pencil that had seen better days. The morning sun cast sharp lines across the wooden table, where empty coffee mugs and old seed catalogs were scattered like relics of a simpler life won, without late-night thefts or bank deadlines breathing down his neck. All right, he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. If the cops won't help, guess it's on me. That's when the door burst open, with the kind of clatter that only a teenager could produce. Uncle Cal, Tanner Brooks called out, dropping a backpack on the floor with a thud. I brought all the gear I had in the dorm. Hope you got coffee. Calvin turned, giving his 19-year-old nephew a weary but grateful smile. You brought the future with you. Nah, Tanner smirked. Just a little tech magic and a whole lot of caffeine. Tanner was the kind of kid who had been tearing things apart and rebuilding them since he was 7 lawnmowers, old radios, his dad's garage door opener, twice. Now he was a computer science major at a university in Kansas City, sharp as a tack, and the only person Calvin knew who might just outwit a crew of produce stealing professionals. They sat at the table and Calvin briefed him. Again, for the 4th time. Tanner listened patiently, nodding. Okay, so it's always the same 2 crops. Your purple sweet corn and those sugar-striped melons, right? Right. Both go for good money at farmers markets, and they only take the ripe ones like they know exactly when to strike. Tanner leaned back. It's surgical. Someone's tracking your harvest cycle, maybe even been watching from a distance. Calvin exhaled hard through his nose. Well, they sure ain't leaving fingerprints. Not that it'd matter. Tanner tapped the table. So here's what I'm thinking. UV powder and GPS trackers. Calvin blinked. UV, like the stuff that glows under a blacklight? Exactly. Totally food safe. You dust it on a few crops. Invisible to the naked eye, but it'll light up like a crime scene under UV. Then we rig some motion sensors to trip alerts and capture timestamps. And if we go the extra mile, hide a few micro GPS beacons in the ears of corn. Calvin raised an eyebrow. Sounds like you're trying to catch a spy, not a crop thief. Hey, Tanner grinned. Modern problems, right? By mid-afternoon, Olivia had returned from town with extra batteries, some UV powder Tanner had ordered online, and enough duct tape to hold the barn together if a tornado ever hit. I still think you should post this online, she said, unpacking the boxes. People love stories where the little guy fights back. Calvin wasn't so sure. This isn't exactly some feel-good family movie, Liv. This is real. But it could be both, she argued. We're not just trying to protect this farm. We're proving something bigger, that you don't need a billion-dollar company to get justice. That night, the three of them moved like quiet ghosts through the rows of corn. Calvin had never felt more like a stranger in his own fields. Under the low-hanging moon, everything looked different, more fragile somehow, more vulnerable. Tanner worked fast, clipping small devices to the base of the stalks and brushing faint trails of UV powder along the husks. Don't overdo it, he said. Too much and they'll notice. Just a fine mist, enough to tag 'em. Calvin knelt beside a row, gently brushing powder onto a few perfectly ripened ears. He couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt. He'd grown these plants from seed, tended them through droughts and storms, and now he was laying them out like bait. Feels wrong, he said quietly. Olivia knelt beside him. It's not wrong. You're protecting what you grew. If someone stole from a grocery store, there'd be security cameras and alarms. This is no different. But it is, Calvin muttered. We're farmers. We're not supposed to need traps. We're supposed to be able to trust our neighbors. Olivia didn't say anything for a while. Then, maybe we're not catching neighbors anymore. By 2 a.m., the last sensor had been mounted. Tanner double-checked the Bluetooth sync between the trackers and his phone. All right, he said, holding it up like a victory torch. System's live. Calvin looked out across his fields. The corn stood tall and silent in the dark. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. You sure this'll work? He asked, more from hope than doubt. It'll work, Tanner said, and even if it doesn't, at least we're doing something. Olivia took a picture, just a quick snapshot of Calvin standing under the moonlight, rows of corn behind him, holding a flashlight like a sentry on the edge of war. Modern farmer versus the midnight marauders, she joked. I ain't trying to go viral, Liv. Well, she smirked, maybe you don't have a choice. They headed back toward the house, the silence of the land folding around them like a thick wool blanket. Every so often, Calvin looked back. The devices were hidden. The powder was invisible, but he felt them out there, waiting. At the edge of the porch, he paused and turned toward the fields one last time. The lights on the motion sensor blinked once, then again, then went still. Game on, he whispered. Inside the house, Tanner stayed up late, coding the alert system and app that would notify all three of them if the sensors were tripped, send GPS data in real time, and mark UV confirmed tampering with location tags and timestamps. Olivia drafted a short video teaser for TikTok titled How to Tag a Tomato Thief Farmer Style, set to a snappy instrumental track. Calvin watched them both with quiet awe. This was his family city kid with the mind of a hacker and sister with a fire that could burn through red tape. And him? Just an old farmer with too many bills and not enough answers. But tonight, for the first time in weeks, he felt something unexpected bubbling up inside his chest. Hope. When he finally lay in bed, boots off, heart still racing, he couldn't sleep. Not fully. Not with everything riding on what might or might not happen in the dark. But just before dawn, as the first faint blue light reached across the horizon, Calvin sat up, looked out the window, and whispered the words he hadn't dared to say in weeks. Let 'em come. The first 2 nights were quiet. Too quiet. Calvin checked his phone obsessively, sometimes waking in the middle of the night just to make sure the app hadn't missed anything. Tanner had configured it to ping their phones immediately if motion was detected or if a tracker was moved, but there hadn't been so much as a flicker, not even a raccoon to trigger the motion sensors. By the third night, the silence had started to gnaw at Calvin's nerves. He stood alone by the window after dinner, the house dark except for the soft glow of a lamp. Outside, the corn swayed gently in the breeze, and the moon cast a silver sheen over the rows of ripening crops. It felt like the whole world was holding its breath. "They know something's different," he muttered. "Or they're just biding their time," Olivia said, appearing beside him with 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one. "Patience, Cal. If they're smart, they won't strike until they feel safe again." He sipped the coffee and nodded. "Let's hope they feel real safe tonight." At exactly 2:17 a.m., Calvin's phone vibrated. He didn't need to check the screen. The tone Tanner had programmed was unmistakable, a sharp digital chirp that sliced through sleep like a blade. He bolted upright, grabbed his jeans, and hollered down the hallway. "Tanner, Liv, it's go time!" By the time he reached the front porch, Tanner was already pulling on boots, and Olivia had the GoPro strapped to her chest. Her phone was live streaming. "Which field?" Calvin asked, yanking open the app. "East Field," Tanner confirmed. 2 sensors triggered. Tracker 8 just went mobile. They moved fast, cutting across the back pasture in near silence. The dew-drenched grass soaked their pant legs, and their breath fogged in the cool Missouri night. Tanner held the UV flashlight, sweeping it low across the path as they moved. And then they saw it. A faint trail, small specks glowing bluish-white under the UV beam, leading away from the rows of corn. "We got 'em," Olivia whispered. The trail was sloppy, but fast. Bits of powder on the ground, tiny smudges on a fence post, even a glowing handprint on the tailgate of an old wooden gate. "They were in a rush," Tanner said. "No time to cover their tracks." Calvin crouched by the trail. "They went out the back fence, probably where the road bends behind the creek." "Wait!" Olivia hissed. "Listen!" In the distance, an engine. They crept toward the sound, crouching behind a stand of oaks at the far edge of the property. Through the brush, headlights cut across the road. A small box truck rolled away, its taillights glowing red in the night. "Get the plate," Calvin whispered. Olivia raised her phone, zoomed in. The truck turned just enough for the rear to come into view. "Got it," she said. "It's blurry, but it's readable." Tanner checked the app. "Tracker 8 is still moving. That truck's hauling your corn." They stood in the dark, heartbeats pounding. For the first time, Calvin didn't feel helpless. He felt pissed. Back at the house, none of them went back to sleep. Olivia uploaded the footage before sunrise and titled it "Thief Tagged by Farmer's Homemade UV Trap. Watch the trail light up." It exploded, 600,000 views by noon. Local papers picked it up, then regional outlets, then YouTubers with millions of subscribers. Comments flooded in. People were furious, fascinated, inspired. "Who steals organic corn?" one user wrote. "These farmers are badass." "This is like CSI Farm Edition." "Catch 'em, Cal," reporters started calling. The sheriff's office, which had brushed off Calvin 2 weeks earlier, suddenly wanted a meeting. News vans circled Liberty Ridge like vultures with cameras. But it wasn't just attention, it was validation. And it came with pressure. "Do we show our faces?" Olivia asked that afternoon as they sat in the barn, exhausted but electrified. "People want an interview." Calvin leaned against the workbench, arms crossed. "We didn't do this for fame." "No, but we did it to protect our farm, and now folks are listening. Maybe it's time to say something." Calvin sighed, pulled his cap lower over his eyes. "Then let's make sure we say the right thing." They held off on giving interviews for now, but Olivia crafted a second video, a narrated breakdown of how the trap worked, with footage of the UV powder lighting up and the tracker data syncing with their app. Tanner added animated overlays, showing the truck's movement and field layout. The second video went even more viral. Within 24 hours, it passed 1.3 million views. Influencers picked it up. Small farm advocates reposted it. Even a couple of tech blogs were talking about the Missouri farmer who turned his crops into a trap. Meanwhile, Calvin still had to farm. That afternoon, he was back in the field, tending the parts of the corn crop that hadn't been stolen. The sun beat down hard, sweat soaking the back of his shirt. But for once, the weight on his shoulders wasn't just about survival, it was about momentum. At dusk, he stood on the porch with Olivia and Tanner. They watched the last of the sun dip below the hills. "You really think they'll come back?" Tanner asked. Calvin chuckled. "Oh, they will. Crooks like this don't back down easy. Not unless we push back harder." Olivia turned toward them. "Then maybe next time, we won't just follow the trail. Maybe we'll find out where it ends." Calvin nodded slowly, and in the distance, the fields swayed quietly again. But this time, they weren't just fields of corn. They were a battleground, a statement, and the opening act of a fight that was just getting started. The morning sunlight spilled across the fields of Liberty Ridge, glinting off the dew-laced leaves like 1,000 tiny mirrors. Calvin Brooks sipped his black coffee from a chipped ceramic mug, standing barefoot on the porch, feeling the worn wood beneath his heels. He didn't say much, just stared out at the acres he'd poured his life into. Beside him, Olivia scrolled through her phone, her thumb moving with the steady rhythm of someone tracking a digital storm. "You might want to see this," she said, turning the screen toward him. It was a direct message from TikTok. Username, @PlantBasedPatriot. Attached was a blurry photo of a produce shelf taken inside what looked like a boutique market. A small handwritten sign read, "Heirloom Organic Purple Corn Local Harvest." And there it was, Calvin's corn, his distinct dark purple, perfectly ripened kernels staring back at him through the glass. "Springfield," Olivia added, "about an hour and 45 south. That's their flagship store." Calvin narrowed his eyes. They didn't just steal it, they're selling it. "And not just anywhere," Olivia said. "They're passing it off as premium boutique produce, like it's some fancy curated crop from a magical little coop." "Load the truck," Calvin muttered, setting his mug down. "We're paying 'em a visit." The ride to Springfield was quiet at first, the truck's worn tires humming against the highway. Olivia tapped away on her phone, researching the shop that matched the photo. It was called The Sprout Shelf, located in the heart of Springfield's eco-district, a stretch of cafes, herb shops, yoga studios, and overpriced groceries that smelled like lemongrass and imported incense. "They've got a couple locations," she said, "but this is their biggest. Also, they've been posting about supporting small farms for weeks. The irony is thick." Calvin didn't reply. His jaw was set, his focus razor sharp. Every row of stolen corn, every sleepless night, every time the cops shrugged, he carried them with him now, like freight. They arrived just after 10. The Sprout Shelf looked like something out of a Pinterest board chalkboard signs, bamboo baskets, handwritten pricing. A wind chime jingled as they stepped inside. The produce section was tucked in the back, beneath a large mural of cartoon carrots riding bicycles. And there it was again, a wooden crate brimming with rich, violet-colored corn. Calvin didn't need to read the sign this time. "Got the light?" he asked quietly. Olivia nodded and pulled out the UV flashlight. She waited until the store clerk ducked into the back, then clicked it on. Tiny fluorescent flecks danced across the husks. Calvin exhaled slowly through his nose. "Damn, it's ours." They approached the front desk and asked for the manager. A woman in her early 30s with cropped blonde hair and a sunflower tattoo on her forearm introduced herself as Kara. "Hi, how can I help you today? Are you looking for anything specific or—" "Yeah," Calvin cut in, calm but firm. "We're here about the corn." She blinked. "The corn?" "The purple heirloom sweet corn," Olivia clarified. "It was stolen from our farm 3 days ago." Kara's expression shifted instantly. I'm sorry, what?" Calvin held up his phone, showing the blinking tracker. "One of our GPS tags is in that crate. We also use UV reactive powder. You want to see the glow?" Kara looked genuinely confused, but also nervous. We don't buy directly from farms. We get all our produce through Heartland Produce. They've been our supplier for over a year. They promised us everything's certified organic and traceable." "Do you have the shipping logs for this batch?" Olivia asked, stepping forward. "Delivery slips, anything?" Kara nodded quickly. Yes, please, come to the office. Inside the cramped office behind the juice counter, Kara pulled up her purchase records. Olivia took photos of everything: shipment times, item numbers, the invoice. There was no mention of the farm of origin. Heartland's name is on the paperwork, Olivia muttered. No farm code, no grower ID, just local organic partner. Calvin looked from the screen to the manager. They're laundering stolen crops through your shelves and selling them at double the price. Kara paled. I had no idea, I swear. We believe you, Olivia said, but we're not going to be quiet about this. Back in the truck, Calvin was silent for a moment, staring out the windshield. This ain't just theft, he finally said. It's a racket. Someone's running a whole damn operation. Olivia nodded. Then let's follow the product. We've got a name. Now we track the trail. That night, Olivia posted a new video. Footage of the UV glowing corn, snapshots of the receipts, Calvin's gravelly voice, narrating over soft acoustic guitar. Today, we found our stolen corn 100 miles away, labeled local organic, sold by folks who had no idea they were part of a scam. The distributor, Heartland Produce, and this is just the beginning. Within hours, the video hit over 1.2 million views. The comments exploded. This is criminal, straight up food fraud. Y'all need a lawyer and a Netflix deal. I'm checking every label at my store from now on. More farmers started to DM Olivia. A zucchini grower in Arkansas had lost 3 pallets of vegetables last month. A tomato farmer in Kansas said he'd noticed similar cuts in his vines. It wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't petty theft. It was organized. And Calvin Brooks, the quiet farmer from Liberty Ridge, had just cracked it wide open. Around midnight, Calvin sat alone in the barn. The hum of cicadas echoed outside as he examined the tracker data on his phone. His corn was out there in warehouses, markets, trucks. He wasn't chasing shadows anymore. He had names. He had places. And the next step would take him even deeper into a world he never wanted to be part of, one where corporations played fast and loose with words like organic, and small farmers were treated like expendable footnotes. But not this time. This time, Calvin had the receipts, and the world was watching. 3 days after uncovering their stolen corn on the shelf of a boutique organic market in Springfield, Calvin, Olivia, and Tanner found themselves back in the dimly lit barn, hunched over the dusty workbench that had unofficially become their command center. The place smelled like old hay, engine grease, and determination. Tanner had his laptop open, wires spilling out like spaghetti, and a line of miniature GPS chips lined up like tiny soldiers ready for deployment. We can't wait for another TikTok message to show us where our stuff ends up, Olivia said, arms crossed. We need to follow it ourselves, from our fields to wherever it goes. Agreed, Calvin said. We need a trail they don't know we're watching. Tanner tapped a few keys. I upgraded the trackers last night. Each one's got a 6-day battery life, encrypted GPS, and a burst ping feature every 30 minutes. Should be enough to track them from field to shelf. He handed one to Calvin. It was no bigger than a lima bean, encased in waterproof plastic, with a little adhesive patch on one side. Damn, Calvin said, holding it up to the light. And you built these in a barn? With Wi-Fi that cuts out every time someone uses the microwave, Tanner said, grinning. They prepped that night, selecting 30 ears of the ripest corn and another 15 cantaloupes each, a glowing shade of golden orange, heavy and fragrant. The trackers were carefully embedded into the stem ends and under the cantaloupe rinds, camouflaged so thoroughly even Calvin had trouble finding them again. By the following evening, the bait was set. The moon hung full and bright over Liberty Ridge as the 3 of them returned to the house, leaving the crops swaying gently in the breeze. All they could do now was wait. 2 nights later, at 3:24 a.m., the first signal hit. Tanner's phone buzzed, then Olivia's. Then Calvin's landline rang a backup alert system Tanner had rigged with a spare SIM card and an old rotary phone. They jumped into action like a volunteer fire crew. Calvin drove the pickup while Tanner watched the blinking dots on the screen. East lot, he said. 3 trackers are moving. Fast. How fast? Calvin asked. Like, someone tossed them into a truck and peeled out. They didn't chase the vehicle that night. They didn't need to. They had the data. By morning, the signals had traveled 26 miles southeast, stopped for 11 minutes in an unincorporated stretch near a decommissioned grain elevator, then continued on until they hit the outer edge of a major highway corridor. "This is no backroad operation," Olivia said, scrolling through the GPS pings. "They're routing stolen produce through an actual logistics channel." "Warehouse," Calvin muttered. "Gotta be." Tanner zoomed in on the map. "Here, looks like a nondescript facility off Highway 63. Massive building, no signs, but 3 of our trackers are still pinging from there." The next day, they made the drive. Calvin wore his oldest flannel. Olivia had a DSLR camera hanging from her neck, and Tanner brought a duffel bag full of spare trackers and a drone, just in case. The building was a squat concrete box with rows of trucks pulling in and out. No branding, no storefront, nothing to indicate what it housed. The kind of place that could have been storing anything from drywall to dog food, or, as they suspected, stolen farm goods. They parked across the road behind a line of trees. Tanner launched the drone. "We keep it under 150 feet, low and slow," he said, controlling it with precision. "I'm running thermal mode. Any place they're moving produce, we'll see the heat signatures." The drone circled twice. Then Tanner leaned in. "Got it. Loading dock in the rear north side, hot as hell." Olivia zoomed in with her lens. Crates, stacked high. She snapped dozens of shots. One, in particular, made Calvin lean forward and squint. "Look there, those green plastic bins. We used to sell in those 3 seasons ago. Got 'em from a co-op that shut down. Ain't no way they're still in circulation unless someone kept 'em." Olivia checked her photos. "There's a tracking dot in there too. They never even took it out." "We need to get in," Calvin said. "That's breaking and entering," Tanner reminded him. "I didn't say today," Calvin replied, "but we got to figure out what this place is, who runs it, and where it all leads." They returned home, unease hanging over them like storm clouds. That night, Calvin couldn't sleep. He wandered the porch with a flashlight, pausing often to look across the fields. "This ain't petty theft," he muttered. "This is a damn system." The next afternoon, as Olivia was sorting through the photos and Tanner was extracting data from the GPS logs, a white truck rolled up the driveway. The man who stepped out looked like he belonged in a truck stop at weathered jeans, ball cap, an old thermos tucked under one arm, but his eyes were sharp. "You Calvin Brooks?" Calvin stepped forward cautiously. "That's me." "Name's Jacob. I used to drive for Heartland Produce. Saw your video. I think I can help." They invited him in. Over coffee at the kitchen table, Jacob laid it all out. "Used to haul legit stuff for Heartland," he said. "Then, maybe a year ago, things got weird. Extra stops. No questions asked. Policies. Produce that didn't match manifests." "You saying they're relabeling stolen goods?" Olivia asked. Jacob nodded. "And mixing it with bulk buys from foreign imports, passing it off as local organic. Thing is, they're real careful. Use third-party warehouses, ghost distributors. You gotta know where to look." He slid a folded sheet of paper across the table. An old shipping log. Handwritten notes. Company codes. "That's where your corn ended up," he said. "And it ain't just yours. This goes statewide. Maybe bigger." Calvin looked down at the paper, then at Olivia, then Tanner. "We ain't just catching crooks anymore," he said. "We're about to crack open a damn empire." And the gears started turning. That night, Olivia drafted a new outline. Targets to follow, data to gather, cameras to mount. Calvin made a list of farmers he knew had been hit by theft in the last year. Tanner sent encrypted copies of their data to 2 different cloud drives, just in case. They weren't just fighting back now, they were going on offense. And with the evidence mounting and the story spreading, it was only a matter of time before someone with real power started listening. But until then, Calvin Brooks wasn't going anywhere. He'd planted the seeds of a reckoning, and harvest time was coming fast. It didn't take long. Within hours of posting the footage from the organic market in Springfield, Olivia's video was spreading like a prairie fire across the internet. Caught red-handed, organic market busted with stolen produce. Read the thumbnail. The clip opened with the glowing corn under UV light, then cut to Calvin's quiet voiceover. "That's our corn, no question about it." The algorithm loved it. A small-town farmer with a DIY security system going head-to-head with corporate trickery? That was the kind of David versus Goliath story people devoured. By the next morning, the video had surpassed 2 million views. By noon, it was on the homepage of Reddit, featured in the r public freakout and r mildly infuriating threads, where users debated food ethics and praised Calvin's ingenuity. TikTokers stitched the video with commentary. YouTubers made breakdowns. Twitter turned it into a movement. In farmers revolt. UV justice. Darcy save our crops. Calvin wasn't sure how to feel about any of it. He didn't have a Twitter account, never posted a selfie in his life. But now his phone wouldn't stop ringing. News outlets, podcasters, documentary crews, even an email from a late-night talk show asking for an appearance. "We're not done yet," Olivia reminded him. "This is good, this is loud, but it ain't justice, not yet." She was right, and justice needed more than likes and shares. That same day, a private message came through Olivia's inbox from a man named Cody Jensen, a farmer from Oklahoma. "Saw your video. Our heirloom lettuce disappeared 2 weeks ago. Same clean cuts, same selective picking. I think it ended up in Dallas." Then another from a woman in Arkansas. "Our yellow heritage carrots were taken last month. A friend spotted the same bunch at a co-op market in Little Rock." And then dozens more, farmers from all over the Midwest and South, sharing eerily similar experiences. All of them thought they were alone, chalking it up to a local thief or bad luck. Calvin sat on the porch that evening, looking over a printed map Olivia had taped to a piece of plywood. Red pins marked every report. The web stretched from Iowa to Texas. "This ain't random," he said, staring hard at the cluster near Kansas City. "This is a system." Tanner walked out from the workshop with a half-eaten granola bar and grease on his hands. "I just finished an update to the tracker interface," he said. "We can overlay the pin reports with logistics routes. Might help us spot patterns." Calvin blinked. "Since when do you talk like a crime analyst?" "Since I realized this was bigger than our farm," Tanner said. The next day, Olivia posted a follow-up video titled, "Farmers Across the Midwest Speak Out This Is Bigger Than Theft." In it, she layered clips from Calvin, Cody, the carrot farmer, and others who had sent in video testimonies. The footage ended with Olivia holding up the tracker app. "We're not just farmers anymore," she said. "We're investigators, and we're coming for the truth." The video rocketed past 4 million views in less than 24 hours. One of the first to call was a man named David Stein, a corporate accountability lawyer out of St. Louis. "What you have here is evidence of coordinated criminal fraud," he told Calvin over speakerphone. "If this goes to court, it won't just be theft. It'll be RICO-level conspiracy. You need legal protection." Calvin leaned back in his chair, rubbing his jaw. "You offering to be that protection?" "Pro bono. Me and 5 others. All farm kids, grown up into pissed-off lawyers." Tanner muttered. "Sounds like the Avengers Midwest edition." David laughed. "You got no idea." 2 days later, the sheriff's office finally came knocking. Sheriff Monroe Davidson, a stoic man with a gut full of black coffee and decades of indifference, stood on the porch with a deputy and a notebook. "Got a lot of calls about you, Mr. Brooks," he said. "Internet says you caught yourself some produce pirates." Calvin didn't smile. "Y'all didn't care when I came in the first time." "Yeah, well," the sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "Governor's office called. Even got word from the USDA. Looks like someone higher up thinks it's worth a look." He took a long pause. "Mind if I take a look at those trackers of yours?" Calvin nodded toward the workshop. "Come on back." As the sheriff walked with Tanner into the barn, Olivia whispered, "They're not here because they believe you. They're here because they got embarrassed." Calvin just stared out toward the fields. Let them be late to the party, long as they bring firewood. By week's end, it wasn't just news vans pulling up at the farm. It was advocacy groups, university researchers, and small-scale organic farmers with their own stories and their own evidence. One couple drove in from Nebraska with crates of glowing produce they'd pulled from a nearby Whole Foods. A chef from Kansas City brought a menu that listed Calvin's specific variety of corn, claiming he'd bought it directly from Heartland Produce just days ago. "Only problem is," Calvin said, holding up his phone, "my harvest's still in the ground." That quote alone landed on the front page of the Missouri Tribune. And just like that, what began with a late-night glow in the dark had become a floodlight on a much larger crime. The people had spoken. The internet had roared. Now it was time for justice to catch up. And this time, the farmers weren't backing down. The farmhouse kitchen had become a war room. Olivia had taken over one end of the table with her laptop, stacks of printed invoices, digital screenshots, and a growing folder of statements from farmers across the Midwest. Calvin paced nearby, arms crossed, his jaw clenched tight. He hadn't shaved in 2 days, and the bags under his eyes spoke volumes. Across from Olivia sat Aaron Dalton, the volunteer attorney from Kansas City, who had messaged them after watching their viral videos. "I'm telling you," she said, tapping the folder, "this is enough to trigger an investigation with the USDA and potentially the Federal Trade Commission. Fraud of this scale, with traceable supply chains and consumer deception, it's a big deal." Calvin stared at the window, watching the breeze ripple across the rows of corn. "Big deal doesn't pay my loan in 2 weeks. "It might," Aaron said calmly. "Once this gets formalized, you'll have legal standing, and the USDA has emergency relief funds for whistleblower cases, but we have to move." Olivia clicked into her file. "Here's everything we've compiled so far. Video evidence from the UV markers, the GPS tracker data, statements from 3 store managers, and 27 messages from other farmers identifying their produce in similar markets." Aaron raised an eyebrow. 27? "People are coming out of the woodwork," Olivia said. "Once the video hit 10 million views, it stopped being about our farm. It's bigger now." Tanner came down the stairs carrying a duffel bag and a soldering iron. "If y'all want more data, I'm upgrading the tracker software. I can add environmental metadata, light levels, movement speed, geo-stamped logs every 10 seconds. Olivia turned to Aaron. "Can we use that?" "Hell yes, we can use that." 2 days later, Aaron submitted the formal complaint to the USDA and the Federal Trade Commission. She filed it under Calvin's name, but included an appendix listing the other affected farmers, the media evidence, and digital logs. That same afternoon, a USDA agent named Ross Ellison called Calvin directly. "We've reviewed your documentation," the agent said, voice clipped and professional. "We're authorizing a preliminary field inquiry effective immediately. Agents will be on site within 72 hours. That night, local news picked up the story. By morning, it had hit the Associated Press. Calvin couldn't step outside without someone honking, waving, or stopping to drop off fresh pies and well wishes. He was grateful, but restless. The real fight was just starting. On the 3rd day, 3 black SUVs rolled up the gravel driveway. Out stepped Agent Ellison and his team. Olivia gave them a complete tour, showing how the tracker system worked, how the UV powder was applied, and how they matched the GPS data to the stores. They even had a side-by-side video showing stolen produce being resold under different labels. "I've never seen a farmer with forensic capability like this," Ellison said. "Desperate men do smart things," Calvin replied dryly. The team took samples, interviewed witnesses, copied files, and by sundown, they were en route to Springfield with a warrant. The next morning, headlines broke. USDA raids Heartland Produce Distribution Center in Springfield following allegations of organic fraud. Calvin watched it unfold from the farmhouse porch, his phone buzzing nonstop. Olivia stood beside him, visibly shaken and proud. "We're not done," she said. "This isn't just Heartland. I guarantee you they're not acting alone." Later that day, Aaron returned with news. "We've been contacted by the office of a state senator. They want Calvin to testify before the Agriculture Oversight Committee next week." Calvin nearly choked on his coffee. "Me?" "They want the man who turned his cornfield into a crime lab," Aaron smiled. "I didn't sign up to be anyone's damn hero," he muttered. "No," Olivia said, "but you became one anyway." The following morning, the USDA released a press statement confirming that multiple crates from Heartland Produce contained trace levels of the same UV powder used by Calvin. Photos of glowing corn under blacklight were now making their way into newsrooms across the country. Calls poured in. NPR requested a live interview. A documentary filmmaker from New York sent a film crew to Liberty Ridge. Even a late-night host made a joke about the glow-in-the-dark corn saga. But the moment that hit hardest came when Calvin received a handwritten letter from an elderly farmer in Iowa. The note read, "You reminded us that the dirt under our boots still matters. That fighting for your crop is fighting for your dignity. Thank you." Calvin read it 3 times before quietly slipping it into his wallet. By Friday, Aaron received confirmation that a joint USDA-FTC task force had been formed to investigate broader fraud in organic distribution networks. "This is snowballing fast," she said, looking over the latest brief. "You've started something that's not going to stop at Missouri's border." That night, after dinner, Calvin sat with Olivia and Tanner in the barn. The summer air buzzed with crickets, the walls still warm from the day's heat. "We need to start thinking long-term," Olivia said. "If this goes federal, and it's looking like it will, we need a network, a coalition of small producers who've been hit. We share data, stories, support." Calvin looked at her, then at Tanner. "Think you can build something like that?" Tanner nodded. "With the right infrastructure, yeah, a secure portal, upload capability, farmer verification tools, we could do it." Calvin leaned back on the hay bale, hands laced behind his head. "Well then," he said, "let's raise some hell." As the crickets chirped and the stars blinked above Liberty Ridge, it was clear. This wasn't just a case anymore. It was a movement. And it was just getting started. The sun had barely broken the line of sycamores at the edge of Calvin Brooks' land when the news broke. It came not through gossip or the mailman, but through the flickering screen of Olivia's phone, buzzing non-stop on the kitchen table. "It's official," she said, breathless. "The USDA just passed the Origin Trace Act." Calvin looked up from his coffee. "That the thing you and Aaron were yelling about last night?" "That's the one," Olivia grinned. "Real-time verification of organic produce from farm to shelf. Mandatory for all certified distributors. Monthly audits. GPS-linked sourcing. It's happening, Cal, and you started it." Calvin leaned back in his chair. The old wood creaked. "I didn't start nothing but a fight to keep my corn from being stolen." "And that fight just rewrote policy," she replied. That afternoon, the news trucks started arriving again. It was no longer unusual to have a camera crew on the gravel road leading to Liberty Ridge Farm. What was unusual was that now they came with purpose. Not for a sound bite, but for insight. CNN aired a segment titled, "The Farmer Who Lit the Fuse." NPR called it the Liberty Ridge Effect. The USDA issued a national press release crediting the viral documentation from Calvin's case as the tipping point that mobilized interagency cooperation. "It's a new day for food transparency," said the USDA Deputy Administrator during a press conference. "Thanks to citizen-led innovation, our food systems are finally catching up to consumer expectations." They played a clip of Calvin during the broadcast standing in his dusty boots, holding a glowing ear of purple corn, saying, "All I wanted was to stop 'em from stealing. Guess I ended up doing a bit more than that." By the following week, Calvin was invited to speak on national television. It wasn't the kind of thing he ever imagined doing, but Olivia insisted. She picked out a new button-down for him, ironed his jeans, and cleaned the mud off his boots some of it. He sat in a studio in Kansas City, nervous fingers tugging at his collar while lights flickered on. "Mr. Brooks," the anchor began, "you've been called a folk hero, a disruptor, even Farmer MacGyver. What do you make of all this?" Calvin looked into the camera, hesitated. "I think folks ought to know where their food comes from. That's it. That's all I ever wanted." Back in Liberty Ridge, the impact was undeniable. Local farmers who had once dismissed Calvin as that paranoid guy with the blacklight gadgets now asked for his advice. "Cal," said Dennis Moore, who owned 50 acres of squash down the road, "I was wrong. Dead wrong. That system of yours, it works. My boy's building a tracker off Tanner's schematics now." At the co-op, more than a dozen producers enrolled in a workshop Olivia hosted called "Protecting Your Produce in a Transparent Market." It wasn't long before the barn was converted into a full-blown learning center, and that's when Olivia made her announcement. "We're launching something new," she said, standing in front of a crowd of farmers, reporters, and even a state senator. "Transparent Roots. It's a non-profit dedicated to giving small farmers the tools, tech, and training to verify their crops from seed to shelf. This is how we fight back, not with lawsuits, with truth." Within 2 weeks, they had their first 400 signups. Requests poured in from all over Arkansas, Nebraska, Oklahoma, even as far as California. People wanted to learn, to defend their work, to connect directly with consumers again, without the filter of corporate labels and marketing gimmicks. Calvin stayed humble through it all, but even he couldn't deny what was happening. He was interviewed for a documentary called Food Lines: The Supply Chain Revolution. 3 PhD candidates from the University of Missouri asked to write a thesis on what they dubbed the Brooks phenomenon. "We're studying how grassroots action catalyzed a shift in federal policy," one of them explained. "Honestly, this is historic." "It ain't historic," Calvin replied. "It's just honest." The next turning point came when Olivia gave a TEDx talk in St. Louis. "The gap between producer and consumer," she said on stage, "has grown into a chasm filled with mistrust, marketing spin, and middlemen." Calvin didn't build a bridge with money or politics. He built it with a flashlight and a tractor app. She received a standing ovation. Transparent Roots gained national funding a month later. That fall, a special segment aired on 60 Minutes. The voiceover, what began as a farmer's late-night trap for tomato thieves, has become a movement not just to protect produce, but to restore truth. By the time winter came, Liberty Ridge was no longer just a sleepy speck in Missouri. It was the starting line of something bigger. And Calvin, he never stopped farming, never stopped fixing his own fences or rising before dawn. But now, when he looked out over the corn, swaying in the wind, he saw something else in those fields, a signal that the system could be repaired, that the truth still mattered, and that one farmer, backed by grit, family, and the power of doing what's right, could spark a revolution the whole country would remember. The morning sun climbed gently over the ridgelines of Liberty Ridge, gilding the fields in soft amber as the smell of freshly turned earth drifted through the air. It was the kind of morning where everything felt a little more alive, more connected, like the land itself had taken a deep breath after a long, restless slumber. It had been nearly a year since the first tracker lit up under a UV flashlight. Since then, the quiet Missouri farm had transformed from a place of struggle into a symbol not just for food integrity, but for the quiet revolution that could begin with nothing more than a desperate idea and a little bit of grit. The town was hosting its first ever Verified Harvest Festival, and it was no small affair. Local vendors from 4 states had set up along the winding dirt paths that led through the Brooks family land, each table marked with a shimmering green badge, Farm Verified by Field Trace. The platform born out of the homegrown UV tracker system. Families posed in front of banners showing Calvin's face and the phrase that had become the unofficial motto of the movement, "Truth grows here." Nearby, a group of school children held up signs they'd painted themselves. "Thank you, Farmer Brooks," in bright, crooked letters. But Calvin didn't need the spotlight. He was most comfortable in his denim shirt and weathered cap, walking between booths with a thermos in hand and that familiar squint against the sun. "I still can't believe they made a kid's book about you," Olivia laughed, catching up to him as they passed a booth selling heirloom okra. "The man who trapped the truth. You even have your own cartoon chicken sidekick." Calvin rolled his eyes but couldn't suppress a smile. "Yeah, well, I guess the next generation needs a hero. Might as well be a grumpy corn grower with good aim." Just then, Tanner walked over, holding a phone and grinning. "You're trending again, Uncle Cal. Video of your Senate testimonies got 4 million views overnight. They stitched it next to that clip of you explaining soil biodiversity. Some folks are calling you Agri-Gandalf." Calvin blinked. "That's supposed to be a compliment?" "It is now." Olivia grinned. Later that afternoon, under a canopy strung with lights and bundles of wheat, Calvin stood beside Olivia at the main stage. A sea of folding chairs stretched before them, occupied by farmers, tech developers, policy wonks, and curious locals, all here to celebrate the movement Calvin had unintentionally started. The state governor took the stage to present the Brooks family with Missouri's first Agricultural Integrity Award, a sleek plaque carved from reclaimed barnwood and inlaid with copper. The crowd rose in applause. A local string band played a bluegrass rendition of "This Land Is Your Land." But it wasn't until Olivia took the mic that the air shifted. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice steady, This isn't just about corn or tech or certifications. This is about trust. It's about knowing the hands that fed you and giving those hands the power to say, "This is mine, and I stand by it." She spoke of small farmers finding their voice, of urban consumers using apps to scan QR codes and know exactly where their kale came from. She shared stories from communities across the country and now the world who were no longer forced to rely on blind trust, but could verify it with a scan and a flashlight. Then she turned to her brother. But none of this would have happened if one stubborn man hadn't said, "I'm tired of being stolen from. I'm going to do something about it." The crowd rose again, louder this time. Calvin stepped forward, adjusting the mic awkwardly. "I ain't much of a talker," he started, drawing a ripple of chuckles. "And I never meant to be no kind of symbol. I just wanted to protect what we grow. Turns out, a lot of folks out there wanted the same thing. They just didn't know how to start." He looked out at the rows of faces. "Well, we started, and it ain't perfect, but it's honest." As the festival continued into the evening, with laughter echoing and mason jars clinking, a small group gathered around a new addition to the Brooks property, the Field Trace Learning Barn, a space where students, young farmers, and tech entrepreneurs could collaborate on the next wave of agricultural transparency. Inside, a digital map displayed real-time verification pings from across the globe. Green dots flickered across continents, a rice farm in Indonesia, a vineyard in France, a pepper plantation in Mexico, all linked to the same DNA Calvin's UV tracker had carried, a need to be seen, to be counted, to be believed. Tanner showed the group how the updated platform used blockchain to store tamper-proof harvest logs. Olivia gave a talk on supply chain ethics. Calvin just stood at the back, sipping cider, nodding quietly. By nightfall, as the last speeches wrapped and the stars blinked open above Liberty Ridge, Calvin walked the rows of his corn one more time. He didn't carry a flashlight tonight. He didn't need it. The truth was visible now, not just in UV powder or GPS pings, but in the faces of those who chose honesty, and the voices who refused to let quiet corruption hide in the dark. This legacy, he realized, wasn't something carved in stone. It was planted, nurtured, shared, and it was just getting started. Later that night, long after the music had quieted and most of the guests had gone home, the lights of Liberty Ridge still glowed from the hillside like a stubborn constellation refusing to fade. Inside the learning barn, a few stragglers remained, a small mix of visiting students from the University of Nebraska's Agri-Tech program and local farmers with dirt still under their fingernails. Tanner was finishing a quick demo on traceable composting techniques, while Olivia answered questions about the next phase of the Transparent Growers Network. Calvin sat at the edge of the circle, half listening, half lost in his thoughts. In the background, a muted television replayed an earlier segment from the national news. Tonight, we bring you the story of a man whose fight against crop theft turned into a global model for food transparency. He watched his own face flash briefly on the screen, captured mid-sentence from his Senate testimony the moment he said, "Truth should never be something farmers have to defend alone." It was still surreal. Not long ago, he couldn't get the sheriff to return a phone call. Now, school kids wore shirts with his name on them, and multinational corporations were revising their logistics because of a farmer from Liberty Ridge. But fame had never been the goal. The knock at the barn door was soft, tentative. Calvin stood and opened it. Outside stood two men in their 60s, dressed like farmers but clearly nervous. "You're Calvin Brooks?" the older one asked. Calvin nodded. "That's what they tell me." The man removed his cap, holding it in both hands. "Name's Henry Talbert. This here's Joe. We run a small spread out near Crawford County. Been watching what you've done." He hesitated. Calvin waited. Henry finally continued. "Look, we got hit by thieves 6 months ago. Lost all our organic green beans overnight. Nobody believed it wasn't just raccoons. But your video, your trap, it showed us we weren't crazy. We weren't alone." Joe nodded beside him. "We ain't tech guys, don't even own a laptop, but we want to learn." Calvin stepped back from the door and waved them in. "Then you're in the right place." As they entered, Tanner looked up and grinned. "More recruits?" "More believers," Calvin said. Later, as the barn emptied out for good and Olivia turned off the last projector, she found her brother standing alone beneath the stars again, this time at the far edge of the cornfield. "They're saying your testimony helped push the USDA to finalize the certification bill, House votes next week." Calvin let out a low whistle. "Guess that's one way to plow a field." She nudged him. "You ready for what's next?" He shrugged. "Nope, but I wasn't ready for the first tracker either." He turned to her, a familiar look in his eyes, one rooted in dirt, drought, and decades of morning chores. "But ready or not, the fields are still growing, and as long as they're growing, we'll be here, telling the truth." Back in town the next morning, a mural was unveiled on the side of the old grain co-op. It showed a stylized portrait of Calvin holding an ear of glowing corn under a night sky, flanked by farmers and families holding flashlights like torches of truth. Beneath it were the words, "One light can expose the shadows." People came from all over just to take a picture, and in the background, the corn kept growing. So did the legacy. If you've made it this far, thank you. Thank you for walking through Liberty Ridge with us, for sitting on that old farmhouse porch, for standing beside Calvin in the fields when the night was quiet and justice felt impossibly far away. This story wasn't just about corn, not really. It wasn't just about crop theft or GPS trackers or fraud. It was about something much deeper, something we're losing in a world moving faster than we can hold on to. Trust. It was about a man with dirt under his nails and a storm in his gut who refused to let the silence win. It was about a family, flawed, tired, stubborn as hell, that didn't quit when the bank came calling or the cameras stopped rolling. It was about a community that rose up not with rage, but with roots. And it was about a movement that started in one quiet corner of Missouri and lit up the world one flashlight beam at a time. But here's the truth. This wasn't just Calvin's story. It's your story too. Because whether you live on a farm or 5 floors up in a city apartment, whether you grow your own food or grab groceries on the run, you're a part of this system. And the choices we all make, the ones about what we buy, who we support, what we share, they echo far beyond a checkout line. You shared this story by watching it, by feeling it. You helped it grow. And if you're still here now, that means something. It means you're part of the soil this next chapter is growing from. So let me ask you genuinely, from one neighbor to another, what part of this story hit you hardest? Was it the theft? The courtroom moment? The first tracker lighting up in the dark? Or maybe it was the quiet resilience of a farmer who didn't ask for a fight but showed up for one anyway. Tell us in the comments below. We read every single one. What would you do if someone came for what you built? What legacy would you fight for? Whose voice would you amplify? We want to hear your version of Liberty Ridge, because somewhere out there, someone's going to read your comment and feel a little less alone. And if this story moved you, if it gave you chills or lit a fire in your chest, do us one small favor. Hit that subscribe button, not because it helps an algorithm, but because this story isn't over. In fact, we're just getting started. We've got more to tell, stories from forgotten farms, dusty back roads, ordinary folks doing extraordinary things with nothing but grit, love, and a whole lot of faith in something bigger. You'll want to be here for what's coming next. Trust me. So stick around, comment, subscribe, turn on that bell. Because next time, who knows? The story might just start in your backyard. And when it does, we'll be right here, flashlights on. See you in the next chapter.